A harsh, fluorescent light hummed in the corridor of Dominic Russo's private clinic. Past midnight, the sterile white walls stood silent as a graveyard, the sharp tang of antiseptic thick in the air. Emma Sullivan, one of the Russo family's housemaids, crept out of the medical supply room, her back pressed flat against the door. In her trembling arms, she clutched a small bundle wrapped tightly in a white blanket. Her auburn hair hung in sweaty strands around her pale face, a fresh bruise darkening her cheekbone. Her bandaged hands shook as she pressed the bundle against her chest. Every few steps, she glanced over her shoulder, her amber-brown eyes wide with terror. She had hoped to slip away unnoticed, but fate was never that kind. Dominic Russo emerged from around the corner, ahead a tall, dark silhouette beneath the dim hallway lights. He moved with the quiet, predatory grace of a panther stalking its prey. Black ink tattoos coiled up his muscular forearms where his shirt sleeves were rolled. His steel-gray eyes locked onto Emma instantly, thick brows drawing together in recognition. This was his private clinic. No one was permitted here at this hour without his consent. Emma. His voice cut through the silence, low and commanding. He stepped forward, blocking her path. Emma froze, clutching the bundle tighter. Her heart pounded so violently she could hear each beat thundering in her ears. She had seen Dominic from a distance around the Long Island mansion, but never had his cold, iron gaze pinned her like this. His gray eyes traveled from her ashen, anxious face down to the object cradled in her arms. "It's past midnight." His voice was deceptively soft. "What are you doing here?" The calm in his tone was a lie. Emma could sense the danger coiled beneath. I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, lowering her gaze. "I was just—" She retreated a step as if distance could somehow save her. But Dominic closed the gap in an instant. He stood mere inches from her now, towering and unyielding under the harsh lights. His jaw tightened as he noticed the bruise on her cheek and her bandaged hands. "You're hurt," he said flatly. "What happened?" Emma's mouth went dry. She shifted the bundle slightly, unintentionally drawing his attention to it. "I fell, sir," she whispered. "Just needed some bandages." Dominic's eyes flicked to the half-open supply room door behind her, then back. "At this hour? Without telling anyone?" His tone turned cold. Emma's pulse raced wildly. "I didn't want to bother anyone. I'm fine now, really." It was a weak lie, and they both knew it. Dominic's eyes narrowed. "You're hiding something." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Emma shook her head frantically. "No, sir. A soft sound emerged from the bundle. A faint, muffled whimper. Dominic went rigid, his gaze drilling into the blanket in her arms. "What was that?" His voice dropped dangerously low. "Nothing," Emma breathed, desperation bleeding into her words. But then another sound answered the unmistakable, fragile cry of a newborn. In a flash, Dominic's hand shot out and flipped back a fold of the blanket. Emma gasped but didn't resist as the fabric fell away, revealing a tiny, flushed face. A newborn baby lay curled against her chest. The infant was startlingly small, fragile, and likely premature, which explained how she had managed to conceal him for so long. His small mouth opened in a trembling wail. Dominic stared as if he'd been struck. The hardened mask of the Mafia boss cracked in a moment of pure shock. His hand rose, almost touching the infant's cheek in disbelief, then stopped. When he spoke, his voice was nothing more than a rough whisper. "Whose child is this?" Tears welled in Emma's eyes. There was no escape now. Every nerve in her body screamed to protect her baby, even if it meant facing Dominic Russo's wrath. "Mine," she choked out, her voice barely audible over the blood roaring in her ears. For a single heartbeat, Dominic didn't react. He simply stared at her at the baby, as if trying to piece together a broken puzzle. Emma Sullivan, the quiet maid with the sad eyes, had a baby hidden away. His mind churned with unspoken questions. Above all, one question burned the brightest. She could see it in the way his jaw clenched like iron. "Yours," he repeated slowly. The word hung suspended in the air, heavy with implication. Then the next question fell like a hammer. "Who is the father?" Dominic's voice was lethally calm, the eye of a gathering storm. Emma couldn't speak. Her throat constricted with fear. What could she possibly tell him? She held her baby closer, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. Dominic's patience had reached its limit. He seized her elbow in an iron grip and leaned in close. "Explain, now." The authority in his voice made it clear. Refusal was not an option. Emma opened her mouth, heart pounding wildly, but nothing came out. How could she possibly explain this? If you are listening to this and feel that the story touches something quiet and unspoken inside you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, to like and share this video, so we can continue bringing heartfelt stories every single day. And if it is not too much to ask, tell me where you are watching from and leave a comment below so we know which corner of the world this story has reached, because we treasure every word you share with us." Dominic said nothing more. His hand, hard as iron, still clamped around Emma's elbow as he pulled her down the hallway, their footsteps echoing over the cold tile floor. Emma tried to keep up, her legs trembling as if they might give way, while the baby in her arms had gone quiet, leaving only a soft breath, like the sigh of a falling leaf. Dominic pushed open the door to the office inside the clinic, and the light came on automatically, revealing the room with its large oak desk, steel filing cabinets, and a set of black leather chairs arranged in the corner. He let go of Emma's arm and gently nudged her toward one of the chairs. "Sit down." His voice no longer had the sharp edge it carried in the hallway, but authority still lingered in every syllable. Emma obeyed, folding herself onto the seat, clutching the baby to her chest as if this tiny body were the only lifeline left to her in a stormy sea. She did not dare raise her head. Her gaze remained on the small, sleeping face nestled against her, while tears slid silently down her cheeks. Dominic was in no hurry. He stood there with his back resting against the edge of the desk, arms crossed over his chest, watching her with eyes the cold gray of steel. He saw everything. The bruise on her cheekbone was not new, and beneath the pallor of her skin, he could still make out older shadows fading under the surface. Her bandaged hands bore scratches trailing up to her wrists, not the kind of injury caused by a simple fall. And there was the way she flinched every time he stepped closer, the way her delicate shoulders shook like a leaf in the wind, the way she lowered her head and avoided his gaze like a small animal long accustomed to being beaten. Dominic had lived in the shadows long enough to recognize those signs. This was not a girl who had gotten pregnant by a lover and chosen to hide it. This was a victim. He drew in a long breath, forcing down the anger that was boiling in his chest. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, though the strain underneath it was impossible to hide. "Emma," he called her name, more gently than before. "I am not going to hurt you. Can you tell me what happened?" Emma still did not answer. Her shoulders quivered, and a strangled sob caught in her throat. Tears fell onto the white blanket wrapped around the baby, soaking a small patch of fabric. She wanted to speak, wanted to scream out all the pain she had buried for 9 months, but her tongue felt frozen. Every time she tried to open her mouth, Vincent's image flashed before her eyes, his snake-like stare, his threats echoing in her head. "Say one word, and your sister dies." She could not. She did not dare. Dominic watched her in silence. He saw the absolute terror in her amber-brown eyes, shining with tears. It was not fear of him, not fear of losing her job or being punished. It was the fear of someone wounded down to the bone, the terror of prey cornered by a hunter. And when he took a single step forward, Emma immediately curled in on herself, wrapping her arms more tightly around the baby, her eyes squeezed shut as if bracing for a blow. That reflex stopped Dominic in his tracks. His jaw clenched so hard that a muscle jumped in his cheek. Someone had done this to her, someone inside this very house. He did not ask any more questions. He understood that tonight she could not speak. Fear had wrapped itself around her throat, and he had no wish to push a person who was already at the edge of exhaustion. Dominic pulled his phone from his pocket, dialed a number, and spoke in a low, rough voice. "Prepare the east guest room. Put 2 men on guard. No one goes in without my permission." He ended the call and looked down at Emma, curled up in the chair with the baby sleeping peacefully in her thin arms. "You will stay here tonight," he said, his tone no longer a command but almost a promise. "No one will lay a hand on you." Emma lifted her head for the first time, her reddened eyes searching his face with confusion and a fragile thread of hope, fine as a strand of silk. But before she could say anything, Dominic had already turned away and walked out of the room, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Standing alone in the empty hallway, Dominic shut his eyes for a brief moment. The anger inside him was no longer a smoldering ember. It had exploded into a storm. Someone would pay for this, and he would find that person, no matter who it was. He took out his phone again and called Marco Benedetti. His voice was ice when he spoke. "I need you to investigate something, right now." 10 months earlier, Emma Sullivan's life had been an endless stretch of gray days with no visible end. Every morning, she woke at 5 o'clock in the cramped apartment in Brooklyn, where the streetlights cast a dull glow through a cracked window pane and the wail of ambulance sirens drifted up from the street below. The apartment had only one bedroom, where Lily, her younger sister, slept soundly in a narrow single bed. Emma slept on the old sofa in the living room, its springs sagging so badly that her back ached every morning when she got up. But she never complained. Lily needed proper rest to have the strength to go to school, and Emma only needed to stay strong enough to work. Her father had walked out when Emma was 8 years old, leaving behind a scrawled note and a mountain of gambling debt. Her mother worked herself to the point of collapse, juggling 3 jobs at once until the day she finally fell and was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer. For 2 years they fought the illness, 2 years of medical bills piling higher and higher, and then her mother died just after Emma turned 22. The last thing she said to her daughter was, "Take care of your sister. Do not trust men." Emma had kept that promise. She became father and mother and everything else Lily needed, and she did not trust any man. The job as a maid at the Russo estate was the best opportunity Emma had ever had. The salary was twice what she had earned in any previous job, enough to slowly pay off the $45,000 in debt her mother had left behind, enough to cover Lily's tuition at the community college, and even leave a little for groceries. She had been working there for 6 months, 6 long months of days that started before dawn and ended when the moon was already high in the sky. Every morning, she walked 15 minutes to the subway station, squeezed herself into the packed early commuter trains, then transferred to the Long Island Railroad. The journey took almost 2 hours, and she often dozed off on the train, her head resting against the icy window. The Russo estate stood on a hill in Long Island, as grand as an Italian Renaissance palace with its marble columns, high arched windows, and rose gardens stretching out toward the horizon. The first time she saw it, Emma had been struck breathless with awe, but she quickly learned that outer beauty often concealed inner darkness. The Russo family was not a normal family. They were mafia, and these gold-lined walls had witnessed more dark secrets than she ever wished to know. Emma did everything, scrubbing the marble floors of the Great Hall, which was as large as her entire apartment in Brooklyn, washing the Italian silk bed linens, polishing the heavy silverware, and cleaning the drawing rooms where the paintings on the walls were worth more than her life. She worked silently, head bowed, eyes lowered. She taught herself to become invisible. Do not meet anyone's eyes. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not ask about late-night phone calls or strangers slipping in through the back entrance. Rosa Martinez, the housekeeper, had taught her that on the very first day, here, the less attention you draw, the safer you are. Emma held on to that rule as if it were scripture. Every evening, when she returned to the apartment in Brooklyn, she was so exhausted she wanted to collapse on the sofa and sleep at once. But she forced herself to stay awake long enough to talk to Lily, to ask about her classes, her friends, her dreams. Lily wanted to be a nurse, and Emma would do anything to make that dream come true. She had sacrificed her youth, sacrificed her own dreams, and she did not regret it. Lily was all she had left in this world. Her sister was the reason she got up every morning, the reason she endured every hardship, the only light in her bleak life. After 6 months at the Russo estate, Emma had grown used to the rhythm of life there. She knew which hours she should avoid the East Wing corridor, because the master of the house often passed that way. She knew never to knock on the office door when the red light above it was on. She knew the names of every maid and every guard, and she knew how to turn herself into a ghost. No one noticed her. No one remembered her face. She was just one of dozens of servants, a tiny cog in the vast machine of the Russo family, and Emma preferred it that way. She did not need attention. She needed her paycheck at the end of the month and Lily's safety. Becoming invisible was how she survived, or at least, that was what she had believed. That morning, Emma was on her knees in the great hall, a damp cloth in her hand as she wiped each square of gleaming white marble. Sunlight streamed through the tall, stained glass windows, scattering shimmering bands of color across the floor like shattered jewels. The hall was vast, the ceiling dizzyingly high with a massive crystal chandelier hanging in the center, thousands of crystals glittering like frozen tears. Emma scrubbed the floor in silence, head bowed, her reddish-brown hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck. She had done this hundreds of times, and her body moved on its own while her mind drifted elsewhere, to thoughts of Lily, of the exam her sister would soon take, of the rent due at the end of the month. Footsteps sounded on the east staircase, more than one pair, steady and decisive. Emma lifted her head and her heart seemed to miss a beat. Dominic Russo was coming down the stairs, followed by Marco Benedetti, his advisor, and 2 bodyguards in black suits. The master of this estate looked even more intimidating up close than he had from a distance. He was well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and there was an air of absolute authority in the way he moved. His perfectly tailored black suit hugged a hard, powerful frame, and dark tattoos climbed from beneath the collar of his white shirt. His face was as cold as if it had been carved from stone. his features sharp and angular, and his gray eyes looked as though they could see straight through a person's soul. Emma dropped the cloth at once, rose to her feet, and pressed herself against the nearest wall. She lowered her head as far as it would go, her gaze fixed on her worn old sneakers, hardly daring to breathe. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest as the footsteps drew closer. She could smell expensive cologne mingled with a faint trace of cigar smoke as the group passed by. And then she felt it, a glance landing on her. Just for a second, a single, fleeting second that was enough to make her skin prickle. She did not dare to look up, but she knew that Dominic Russo was looking at her. Then the moment slipped away, the footsteps receded, and vanished beyond the great doors that led out to the grounds. Emma exhaled, her legs so weak she almost collapsed. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to calm the drumbeat of her heart. She bent to pick up the cloth, but her hand was still trembling. At that moment, Rosa Martinez appeared from a side corridor, the housekeeper with her silver hair pinned into a tight bun and sharp eyes that belonged to a woman who had weathered many storms. She laid a hand on Emma's shoulder, her voice a whispered murmur yet firm. "You did well. Remember to stay that way. Never look them in the eye. Never let them remember your face." Emma nodded, her throat dry. Rosa glanced around as if afraid someone might be listening, then pulled Emma into the shadowed nook behind a stone column. She told Emma about Thomas, a servant who had worked there for 3 years. The previous month, he had accidentally broken an antique porcelain vase in the west drawing room, a piece worth as much as a house. That night, Thomas had been summoned to the master's office. No one ever saw him again. His belongings disappeared from his room in the basement as if he had never existed. Some said he had been fired and driven out of the city. Others whispered darker possibilities, but no one dared to ask, and no one dared to find out. Rosa looked straight into Emma's eyes, her voice dropping low and heavy like a curse. "The Russo family does not forgive mistakes. They are not normal people. Do you understand?" Emma understood. She understood more clearly than ever. That night, lying on the old sofa in the Brooklyn apartment, she stared up at the ceiling and spoke to herself in silence. Keep your distance. Do not get involved. Do not notice. All she needed to do was finish her work, collect her pay, and go home to Lily. She would not make mistakes. She would not let anyone remember her. She would become invisible, and she would be safe. It was a perfect plan. But Emma did not know that certain eyes had already begun to follow her from the shadows. 2 weeks after that brief encounter with Dominic Russo in the Great Hall, Emma had settled into the rhythm of life at the estate. She worked like a machine, quiet and efficient, leaving no trace of herself in the minds of those around her. Everything was unfolding exactly according to her plan until that day, the day a sleek black Maserati slipped through the iron gates and came to a smooth stop at the foot of the mansion steps. Vincent Russo had returned. The news swept through the staff like a cold wind. Rosa announced it at the morning meeting, her voice more strained than usual. The master's younger brother would be staying for a while. Everyone was to be careful. There were no further explanations, no details, yet Emma noticed the tense glances the other servants exchanged. She did not understand why until she saw Vincent Russo with her own eyes that afternoon. She was cleaning the east drawing room when he walked in. Vincent was 33 years old, 3 years younger than Dominic, and if you judged him only by his appearance, he could have been any handsome man stepping out of a fashion magazine. His black hair was slicked back, his face was sharply cut with a square jaw, and his thin lips were almost always curled in a lazy half-smile. He wore a white shirt open at the collar, revealing a gold chain and a glimpse of a tattoo on his chest. But when Emma accidentally lifted her head and met his gaze, it was like a bucket of ice poured over her. Vincent's green eyes were nothing like Dominic's cold gray ones. There was something else in them, a slick, oily light hiding underneath, like the stare of a snake watching its prey before it strikes. Emma immediately lowered her head and went back to wiping the oak table, as if she had seen nothing at all. Still, she could feel Vincent's eyes burning into her back. He said nothing at first, simply stood there leaning against the doorway, watching her work. The silence stretched, tight and suffocating. At last he spoke, his voice low and smooth, as if honey had been mixed with venom. "You are new here, right? Never seen you before." Emma kept her head bowed. "Sir, I have been working here for 6 months." Vincent gave a soft whistle and moved closer. 6 months and I did not notice. What a shame. He stopped just behind her, so near that Emma could smell whiskey and cigarettes on his breath. "You are quite worth noticing." Emma's heart was hammering. She clenched the cloth in her hand, trying to keep her voice steady. "I still have a lot of work to do, sir. Please excuse me." She started to move away, but Vincent stepped into her path. He did not touch her. He simply stood there with that hateful half-smile, his snake eyes sliding from her face downward in shameless appraisal. In such a hurry. I only wanted to get to know you. My brother hires such beautiful staff. Emma did not reply. She slipped sideways and hurried out of the room, her heart beating so hard it felt as if it would burst. Vincent's soft laugh drifted after her like the hiss of a serpent. From that day on, Vincent seemed to be everywhere Emma went. When she was cleaning a bedroom on the second floor, he appeared in the hallway. When she was polishing the windows in the drawing room, he lounged on the sofa, staring at her. When she went down to the basement to collect the laundry, he stood at the foot of the stairs with a cigarette in hand. His crude remarks grew bolder with each encounter. Your dress looks wonderful today. The way you bend over is very tempting. If you want to make extra money, I know a way. Every word he spoke was like a knife slicing into Emma's skin, leaving her sick with revulsion and fear. But she did nothing. She did not dare tell Rosa, afraid she would be blamed for causing trouble. She did not dare tell anyone, because Vincent was the master's brother. Who would believe a poor housemaid over a Russo? Emma began altering her schedule to avoid him. She cleaned rooms earlier, chose the emptier hallways, and always tried to keep Rosa or someone else nearby. She told herself that if she was careful enough, if she was clever enough, she could stay out of his reach. She told herself that if she did not react, he would grow bored and lose interest. She was wrong, completely wrong, because for men like Vincent Russo, resistance only makes the hunt more thrilling, and Emma, with her amber-brown eyes full of fear and her slight trembling body every time he approached, had become the perfect prey in his eyes. She did not know it yet, but the snake had already chosen its victim. That fateful night arrived on a Friday, 3 weeks after Vincent Russo's return to the estate. Emma had done everything she could to avoid him, shifting her routines, taking quieter passages, keeping others close whenever possible. But that night, Rosa told her she had to stay late to clean the ground floor sitting room after a family party. It was an order, not a request, and Emma had no choice. She nodded, forced her unease down into her stomach, and soothed herself with silent promises that she would be all right. Vincent was surely drunk and already in bed. She would clean quickly and go home. Everything would be all right. The clock had just struck 11 o'clock at night when Emma began clearing the half-finished glasses of red wine and plates of leftover food from the table. The mansion lay as still as a graveyard, the only sounds the wind sighing past the tall windows and the soft tap of her footsteps on the wooden floor. The sitting room stretched wide in the darkness, lit only by a small lamp in the corner that cast a faint, lonely circle of light. Emma worked as quickly as she could, her hands trembling every time some unfamiliar sound stirred. She kept telling herself she was worrying for nothing. Just a few more minutes and she would be done. Just a few more minutes. She had just set the tray of glasses down on the side table when she heard footsteps, heavy, unsteady. The stench of whiskey rolled through the air before she even had time to turn. Vincent Russo was standing in the doorway, leaning against the wooden frame, his green eyes bloodshot with drink but still sharp as blades when they landed on her. A slow smile spread across his lips, the smile of a hunter who has found the prey trapped in his snare. Emma froze where she stood, her heart skipping a beat and then slamming wildly against her ribs. She glanced around for an escape, but Vincent blocked the main door and the windows were far too high to climb through. Working late, little girl. Vincent's voice stretched out, thick with alcohol yet filled with intent. He stepped into the room and swung the door shut behind him. The click of the lock rang in Emma's ears like a death knell. I have finished my work, sir. Emma tried to keep her voice steady, though her throat felt as dry as a desert. I need to go. She moved toward the door, hoping he would step aside. Vincent did not move. He stayed where he was, barring her path, that smile widening on his mouth. Why the hurry? The night is still long. Emma backed up a step. Please let me go, sir. Her voice shook, a desperate plea scraping past her cracked lips. Her begging only seemed to amuse Vincent. He came closer, one step at a time, like a predator driving its prey into a corner. You have been avoiding me for weeks, he said, his tone darkening. Who do you think you are to turn down a Russo? Emma's back hit the wall. There was nowhere left to go. She opened her mouth to scream for help, but Vincent's hand clamped over it. He pinned her against the wall, his breath hot with the reek of whiskey washing over her face. Do not make noise, he whispered, his voice cold as ice. No one is coming to save you. This is my house. What happened after that? Emma never wanted to remember. The darkness swallowed her whole. The sound of fabric tearing ripped through the silence. Pain stabbed through her body like 1,000 burning needles. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but no sob escaped. because his hand still smothered her mouth. She stared up at the ceiling, into the darkness, and felt her soul peel away from her body and drift upward, far from the nightmare unfolding below. She thought of Lily. She thought of her mother. She thought of the nights when she was a child and her mother held her close and promised that everything would be all right. But nothing was all right. Nothing was right at all. And when the darkness finally let her go, Emma knew she would never be herself again. Vincent rose, straightening his clothes as if nothing had happened. He looked down at Emma, curled on the floor with her dress in tatters, her body shaking like a leaf in a storm. He bent down, seized her chin, and forced her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me, little girl." His voice was clear and cold, with no trace of drunkenness. "If you breathe a word of this to anyone, your sister dies. Lily, is that right? Studying at the community college in Brooklyn. Apartment number 37, the building on Maple Street. I know everything about you." Emma's eyes flew wide in horror. "No, please." Vincent's smile turned cruel. "Stay silent, and your sister lives. Speak, and you will bury her. Understand?" He released her and walked out of the room, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Emma lay there in the dark, in that suffocating silence, amid the broken pieces of the person she used to be. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply lay there, staring up at the ceiling, feeling parts of herself dying one by one. That night, some part of Emma died forever. The next morning, Emma woke on the cold floor of the Russo sitting room. The first light of the new day filtered through the windows and fell across her bruised body like a cruel mockery. She did not know how long she had lain there, only that when she tried to sit up, a tearing pain ripped through her so sharply she nearly blacked out again. But she had no right to collapse. Lily was waiting for her at home. Lily needed her, and if she did not show up for work, Vincent would know she had been broken, that he had won completely. Emma gritted her teeth, gathered the torn shreds of her uniform dress, and slipped out of the mansion before anyone else woke. The days that followed blurred into an unending nightmare. Emma arrived at work on time, wore long sleeves to hide the bruises on her arms, dabbed concealer over the purple marks on her neck and shoulders. She moved more slowly, more carefully, trying not to let anyone see the ache in every step. When Rosa asked why she looked so pale, she said she had a cold. When another servant remarked that she had lost weight, she smiled and said she was dieting. She lied to everyone with a painted smile and empty eyes. No one looked long enough to see the truth splintering inside her. Emma turned, avoiding Vincent, into a survival art. She memorized his schedule, knew when he woke, when he left his room, where he liked to spend his time. She chose the quietest hallways, the safest hours, always making sure someone else was nearby. Whenever she heard his voice drift down a corridor, her heart seemed to stop, her hands began to shake, and she would duck into the nearest shadowed corner until he passed. Sometimes she ran into him anyway, and he would look at her with a triumphant smile, those snake eyes gleaming as if to remind her of that night. At moments like that, Emma wanted to scream, to run as far as she could, to vanish from the world, but she did nothing. She lowered her head, walked past him quickly, and swallowed her terror. At home, Emma had to play the strong older sister in front of Lily. She asked about classes and friends, smiled at the right moments, nodded in the right places, while inside she was silently screaming. Lily knew nothing. Lily could not be allowed to know anything. Every time Emma looked into her sister's clear, trusting eyes, she heard Vincent's threat again. Apartment number 37, the building on Maple Street. He knew everything. He could find Lily whenever he wanted. And if Emma spoke, if she dared to utter a single word, it would be Lily who paid the price. So she stayed silent. She pushed the pain down to the deepest part of herself, built a wall around it, and pretended that night had never happened. But when night fell, after Lily was asleep and the apartment lay in darkness, the nightmares came. Emma found herself back in that room, the darkness swallowing her. Vincent's hand clamped over her mouth, and she could not scream, could not run, could do nothing but sink into the black. She jolted awake, drenched in cold sweat, her heart thrashing, her own hand pressed over her mouth so she would not wake Lily. Then she lay there, staring at the ceiling in the dark, hearing her mother's voice echo back from some faraway memory. "Do not trust men, my girl." Her mother had warned her before she died. Emma had not listened. She had not been careful enough, and now she was paying the price. The weeks slid by, and Emma became a shadow of herself. She grew thinner, her eyes hollow, her frail shoulders bowed as if bearing the weight of the world. She no longer laughed, no longer spoke unless necessary, no longer met anyone's gaze. She existed, But she did not truly live. Each day was a battle, each night a nightmare. Still, she went on. For Lily, for the debt that was not yet paid. Because she had no other choice. Emma buried her horror deep inside, hoping it would stay buried forever. But secrets have their own way of rising to the surface. 6 weeks after that terrible night, Emma began to sense that something was wrong with her body. Every morning she woke with a vicious wave of nausea, rushing to the bathroom to retch until her stomach was empty. At first she thought she had food poisoning, then a bad flu, then sheer exhaustion from overwork. She lied to herself with every excuse she could think of, because the truth was too frightening to face. But when her monthly bleeding failed to come for the second time, when her breasts grew sore, and her body changed in ways she could not explain, Emma knew she could not run from it any longer. She bought a pregnancy test at a pharmacy far from her Brooklyn neighborhood, hiding under a cap like a criminal on the run. Her hands shook as she held the small box, and she nearly dropped it twice on the way home. She waited until Lily had gone to school, locked the bathroom door tight, and followed the instructions with her heart beating so hard it felt as if it would tear free from her chest. 3 minutes of waiting stretched out like a century, and when 2 bright red lines appeared clear as day on the stick, Emma's world collapsed completely. She sank down onto the cold bathroom floor, her back against the toilet, still clutching the pregnancy test as if she stared at it long enough, the result might somehow change. No, no, that cannot be. The words repeated in her mind like a desperate prayer. But the 2 red lines remained, clear and merciless, announcing a truth she could not deny. She was carrying the child of the man who had destroyed her, the child of Vincent Russo. A wave of nausea crashed over her harder than ever, and Emma bent over the toilet, retching until there was nothing left, only bitter bile and tears. In the days that followed, Emma moved through life like a ghost. She went to work, came home, ate, slept, but her mind was elsewhere, spinning through 1,000 questions with no answers. She thought about ending the pregnancy. She searched online for clinics, for costs, for procedures, but the money required was far beyond her reach. She had no health insurance, no savings, and her mother's debt still weighed heavy on her shoulders. She considered borrowing the money, but from whom? Who could she tell? Every path led to a dead end, and Emma felt herself sinking deeper into a mire with no way out. There were nights when she stood in the bathroom, staring into the mirror, and thought about ways to end everything. If she disappeared, the pain would stop. No more nightmares. No more fear. No more unwanted life growing inside her. But then she thought of Lily. Her little sister was only 20, still in college, with her whole future ahead of her. If something happened to Emma, what would become of Lily? Who would pay her tuition? Who would shield her from the cruelty of the world? Emma was the only person Lily had, and she could not abandon her. Never. The decision came on a rainy night, as Emma lay on the old sofa, listening to the drum of rain on the roof. She placed a hand on her abdomen, where a tiny life was forming, and for the first time she felt neither revulsion nor fear. This baby had done nothing wrong. It had not chosen its father any more than Emma had chosen her fate. It was only an innocent life, struggling to exist inside a shattered mother. And although Emma hated Vincent down to the marrow of her bones, although she longed to erase every trace of him from her life, she could not hate this child. It was her blood and flesh. It was her baby. Emma decided to keep the child. She would hide this pregnancy at any cost, would not let anyone know, would not tell Lily, and certainly would never allow Vincent to find out. She did not know how she would manage it, did not know what the future would look like, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would protect this child, even if it cost her everything. She would carry this baby, and this secret, alone. The 9 months of pregnancy were 9 months of hell, a hell of concealment and unrelenting fear. From the very first weeks, she began planning how to keep her secret safe. She bought uniforms 2 sizes larger, telling Rosa she simply preferred to work in looser clothes. She ate less, not out of vanity but because the constant nausea made it almost impossible to swallow food. Ironically, it helped her, because as her body grew thinner, her swelling belly drew less attention. She worked twice as hard, taking extra evening shifts, volunteering to clean the most remote corners of the estate, anything that would make people think she was nothing more than an obsessively diligent maid. The 4th and 5th months were the hardest, but Emma's frail physique became her unexpected ally. Years of malnutrition and stress meant she carried small, and the baby, perhaps sensing the danger, seemed to curl deep inside her. She bought elastic medical bandages to bind her abdomen gently, and started wearing a stiff, heavy starch apron over her uniform at all times. The thick fabric created a rigid silhouette that hid the slight curve of her belly. A dull ache gnawed at her all day, but she gritted her teeth and endured. She wore an extra jacket, even in warm weather, blaming it on the mansion's overly strong air conditioning. When the baby kicked, there were moments she had to fake a cough to cover the hitch in her breath. She lived in a state of constant dread, afraid someone would notice, afraid someone would ask questions, afraid her secret would be dragged into the light. In the 7th month, Rosa almost discovered everything. Emma was cleaning the drawing room windows when a false contraction seized her, forcing her to clutch the sill and bend over. Rosa happened to be walking by, saw her in that strange posture, and hurried over. "Are you all right? You look very pale." She set a hand on Emma's back, and in that instant of pure terror, Emma was sure the truth would be uncovered. But she straightened up quickly, forced a thin smile, and said she was only dizzy from low blood pressure. Rosa studied her longer than usual, her eyes sharp as if they could pierce through the thick jacket Emma wore, but in the end she only nodded and told her to rest a bit. Emma exhaled in shaky relief, though her heart pounded wildly for the rest of the day. By the 9th month, Emma knew she was walking on a knife's edge. Though the heavy apron and her loose clothes still concealed her secret from a distance, her body was screaming for rest. Every step was an ordeal, and the fear of going into labor right there on the marble floor terrified her. She began to avoid the main halls completely, sticking to the shadows. But she knew she couldn't hide forever. She asked for medical leave, telling Rosa that a doctor had diagnosed her with severe pneumonia and ordered complete rest. Rosa was worried and offered to send the Russo family physician to see her, but Emma refused, insisting she already had a doctor in Brooklyn. She returned to the tiny apartment and lay there, waiting for labor to begin in loneliness and fear. When Lily asked why she had stopped working, Emma lied that she had a bad flu and did not want to infect her. She shut herself up in the living room and faked coughing fits so Lily would not suspect. But on that fateful night, all of Emma's plans collapsed. She went to the estate to collect her final month's wages, thinking she would be in and out within a few minutes. Labor caught her on the way, crashing over her without warning. Her water broke right there in the east hallway, and Emma knew she would never make it home in time. In her panic, she remembered Dominic Russo's private clinic in the West Wing, a place she had cleaned more than once. She dragged herself there step by step, biting her lip to keep from screaming, and locked herself inside the medical room. The baby was born in the dead of night, in Emma's muffled sobs and the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights. She cut the umbilical cord with trembling hands, her vision blurring from sheer exhaustion. She didn't have the strength to stand, let alone clean the blood that stained her uniform. Dragging herself up using the counter for support, she managed to wrap the shivering infant in a white blanket. Every movement sent a fresh wave of agony through her battered body. She knew she had to leave, but her legs felt like lead. Clutching the baby tight, she stumbled toward the door, leaning heavily against the wall to keep from collapsing. She pushed the door open, gasping for air, hoping to slip away, but fate was not that kind. As she swayed into the hallway, barely conscious, a dark figure loomed before her. Dominic Russo. After ordering that Emma be taken to a secure room in the East Wing, Dominic Russo did not sleep. He sat in his office, the lamplight carving shadows across his angular face as he brooded. His gray eyes were fixed on nothing, but his mind churned with 1,000 questions. Emma Sullivan, the small maid with the sorrowful eyes, had given birth right there in his clinic. She was so terrified she could not speak, shrinking back from him whenever he approached like a wounded animal. The bruise on her cheek was not fresh. Someone had done this to her, and Dominic would find out who. He picked up the phone and called Marco Benedetti, his closest advisor, who had served the Russo family for 20 years. Dominic's voice was low and cold as he gave the order. "I need you to investigate something, right now," without asking for details. Marco appeared in Dominic's office in less than 15 minutes, his silver hair slightly disheveled from being woken in the middle of the night, but his eyes sharp and clear. Dominic told him what had happened, about Emma, about the baby, about the terror in her eyes when he asked who the father was. Marco listened in silence, his face unreadable, though his brows drew together slightly when Dominic described the marks on Emma's body. "Check the security cameras," Dominic said. "Every camera on the estate. 7 months back, around the time she could have conceived. Find anything out of the ordinary." Marco nodded and disappeared into the security room in the basement. Dominic waited, his fingers tapping a steady rhythm on the oak desktop, anger smoldering in his chest like a fire waiting for air. He did not know exactly what he was looking for, but a man who had spent his life in the underworld had instincts, and his instincts told him the truth would not be pleasant. Nearly 2 hours later, Marco returned carrying a laptop and wearing a strained expression. "Boss," he said, his voice lower than usual, "I found something." He set the laptop on the desk and pulled up a report. On the night of the 13th of March, 7 months ago, the security cameras covering the east hallway and the ground floor sitting room had been turned off for 2 hours, from 11 o'clock at night until 1 o'clock in the morning. Dominic stared at the screen, his gray eyes darkening. Who shut them down? His voice had become a dangerous whisper. Marco hesitated for a second before answering. The security system is protected by the highest level password. Only 4 people have the authority to access it and shut off the cameras. You, me, and your 2 younger brothers. Dominic went still. The air in the room seemed to thicken, heavy enough to choke on. One of his younger brothers had died in a hit 5 years earlier. The other was still very much alive. Vincent. His brother's name tolled in his mind like a funeral bell. Vincent had returned to the estate around that time, after a long trip to Europe. Vincent, who had lived in his brother's shadow, who had always envied the power and respect Dominic commanded. Vincent, with the snake eyes and that calculating half-smile. Dominic closed his eyes, forcing himself to hold back the rage surging through his veins. He did not want to believe it. He did not want to think that his own flesh and blood could do something so brutal to an innocent girl under their own roof. But the pieces were sliding into place one by one, and the picture they formed made him feel sick. The way Emma flinched whenever he came near, as if her body already knew what it was to be attacked by a man. The raw terror in her eyes when he asked about the baby's father, her stubborn silence, as if she were being held in check by something more frightening than his anger could ever be. Marco stood in front of him, waiting for the next order. Dominic opened his eyes, and the gray in them was cold as ice, though beneath that coldness a hellish fire burned. "Find out everything Vincent has been doing for the past 7 months, he said, his voice stripped of all emotion. "Everywhere he has gone, everyone he has met, everything he has done. I want to know it all." Marco nodded and left, and Dominic was alone again in the dark office. He sat there, staring into the shadows, feeling the truth drawing closer than it had ever been. A truth he did not want to believe, yet could no longer deny. A truth far nearer than he wished to admit. Dawn was just breaking when Dominic stood before Emma's door in the east wing. He had not slept at all, his mind churning with what Marco had found, and with suspicions hardening into a terrible certainty. He drew a deep breath, tamped down the slow burn of anger still smoldering in his chest, and knocked softly before stepping inside. Emma sat propped against the headboard, the baby lying quiet in her arms. She had not slept either. Her amber-brown eyes were swollen and red from crying through the night. The moment she saw Dominic come in, she shrank back and tightened her hold on the child, as if she were trying to shield the baby from some invisible danger. That reaction sliced into Dominic like a knife, because he knew she was not afraid of him alone. She was afraid of all men. Afraid because someone had taught her that men brought nothing but pain. Dominic did not move closer. He stood in the middle of the room, keeping enough distance so she would not feel cornered. When he spoke, his voice was far gentler than it had been the night before, the icy authority giving way to something almost tender. "Emma," he said quietly, "I need you to tell me the truth. I will protect you." Emma did not answer. She only shook her head as fresh tears began to slip down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him, wanted to lay down the burden she had carried alone for 9 long months, but Vincent's threat still curled in her mind like a curse. Say one word and your sister dies. She could not take that risk. She could not drag Lily into danger. Dominic saw the struggle written across her face, saw how she longed to speak yet could not, and he understood. Someone was threatening her. Someone was holding something precious to her as a hostage. He thought of the employee file he had asked Marco to pull. 27 years old, parents deceased. One younger sister named Lily, 20 years old, studying at a community college in Brooklyn, living in apartment number 37 on Maple Street. The only family Emma had left in this world. "Lily," Dominic said, and he watched Emma jolt as if struck by an electric shock. Her eyes flew wide with horror, and he knew he had guessed right. "Your sister, Lily. You are afraid someone will hurt her if you speak. Is that it?" Emma broke down then, sobbing so hard she could no longer hold it in. She nodded, admitting the deepest fear in her heart. Dominic moved one step closer, only one, and lowered himself into the chair beside the bed. "I will protect you," he said, his voice firm as a vow. "And I will protect Lily. No one will lay a hand on your sister. I promise you that." Emma looked at him, looked into those gray eyes that were fixed on her not with judgment or fury but with something that felt like understanding. She had lived in the dark for so long, fighting a pain too big for one person, and for the first time someone was offering to stand beside her. For the first time someone was promising to defend her. The walls she had spent 9 months building around herself began to crumble. Emma started to speak, her voice shaking and breaking under the weight of tears. She told him about that night, the night she stayed behind to clean the sitting room alone. She told him about the man, about the reek of whiskey, the sound of the door locking, the darkness swallowing her whole. She did not describe the details. She did not need to. Dominic understood. He sat there in silence, listening, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles jumped in his cheek, but he did not interrupt her. She told him about the threat afterward, about how her attacker knew Lily's address, knew everything about her, and had sworn to kill her sister if she ever spoke. She told him about 9 months of living in hell, hiding the pregnancy, hiding her pain, hiding her fear, carrying it all alone because she dared not put Lily in harm's way. When Emma finished, the room fell into a heavy silence. Only the baby's soft breathing and Emma's ragged sobs broke the stillness. Dominic sat motionless, his face carved from stone, not a flicker of expression. When he finally spoke again, asking his next question, his voice was so low it was almost a whisper. Who did this to you? Emma closed her eyes, tears spilling from beneath her lashes. She knew that once she said the name, nothing would ever be the same. She was accusing her employer's younger brother, the blood relative of the most powerful man in New York. Who would believe her? But she had already come too far to turn back, and Dominic had given her his word. She opened her eyes, looked straight into his waiting gray gaze, and spoke the name with a voice that trembled yet remained clear. Your brother, Vincent. Dominic went utterly still. In that instant he might have been carved from stone, not a movement, not even a breath. His gray eyes darkened like a sky before a storm, and Emma could see the fury boiling beneath his outward calm. It was a rage so vast it could not erupt in shouting or violence. It condensed instead into something cold, lethal, as sharp and silent as a knife. He said nothing for a long minute, only sat there with his jaw clenched and his hands balled into fists on his knees. Then he rose, slowly, like a predator preparing for the hunt. He looked down at Emma, his eyes still glacial, yet when he spoke his voice was unexpectedly gentle. Rest now, he told her. No one will enter this room without my permission. You and the baby are safe here. Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Dominic turned and walked toward the door. But just before he stepped out, he paused for a heartbeat. Without looking back, he spoke one last sentence, his tone cold as ice and firm as a blood oath. I will take care of this. Dominic closed the office door behind him and stood in the dark for a long moment before turning on the light. The familiar room with its great oak desk, its bookshelves soaring up to the ceiling, and its expensive Persian rug seemed suddenly foreign, as if he were standing in a stranger's house. He crossed to the liquor cabinet, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and downed it in a single swallow, feeling the burn slide down his throat. It did nothing to quench the fire blazing in his chest. Nothing would. Vincent, his brother, his own blood, the man who had raped an innocent girl under this very roof. Dominic sank into the leather chair behind his desk, bowed his head, and pressed his hands to his temples. He closed his eyes, and memories flooded in like a breaking dam. Vincent, at 5 years old, sobbing because their father had given Dominic a new bicycle while he got only his brother's old one. Vincent at 12, smashing up his bedroom because their father had taken Dominic along to a business meeting for the first time and left him at home. Vincent at 18, drunk and crashing his car into a lamppost, and Dominic scrambling to pay off the police and the hospital so no one would find out. Vincent had always lived in his brother's shadow, always come second, always been the one compared, and always the one who fell short. Their father had loved both sons, but he had placed his hopes on Dominic, the eldest, the heir, the one who would carry the family. Vincent had been the younger, the spare, the one who was never quite enough. Dominic understood how that had eaten away at Vincent over the years. Envy turning into bitterness, bitterness into hatred, and hatred into something darker still. Yet Dominic had kept covering for him, kept cleaning up his messes, kept forgiving him again and again. When Vincent beat a servant so badly the man ended up in the hospital because he had spilled wine on his shirt, Dominic had paid the bills and bought the man's silence. When Vincent racked up a massive gambling debt with a rival crew, Dominic had settled it and shipped his brother off to Europe to keep trouble at bay. When Vincent was involved in a fatal crash while driving drunk, Dominic had destroyed the evidence and bought off the witnesses. He had done it all, because Vincent was his brother, his own flesh, the only family left to him after their parents died. In their world, blood was everything. Family was sacred. Dominic had believed that all his life, but this time was different. This time Vincent had gone too far. He had not merely beaten a servant or caused an accident because he was drunk. He had raped a girl, an innocent girl who had only been trying to earn a living to support her sister, and he had done it inside Dominic's own house, under the roof where Dominic was responsible for the safety of everyone who lived and worked there. He had turned Emma into a victim, had threatened her younger sister, and had forced her to endure 9 months in a private hell of silence. He had left her to give birth alone in a dim clinic room, afraid and in agony. And that child, the newborn lying now in Emma's arms, carried Vincent's blood, yet was also the living result of the most brutal crime a man could commit against a woman. Dominic opened his eyes and stared into the darkness. He thought of Emma, of her amber-brown eyes shining with tears, of the way she shrank back whenever he came near, of the fear that had gnawed at her for 9 months. She was only a 27-year-old woman, orphaned, raising her younger sister by herself, coming here to work so she could pay off debts and build some kind of future. She had done nothing wrong. She did not deserve any of what had been done to her. And Vincent, his little brother, had taken everything from her. Her innocence, her peace, her belief that the world could be anything but cruel. Dominic rose and walked to the window, looking out over the rose garden drenched in the first light of morning. He had faced difficult choices before, had weighed right against wrong, profit against honor, but he had never faced a choice like this. On one side stood his younger brother, the last of his blood. On the other stood what was right, justice for a girl who had been broken to the core. He closed his eyes, drew a long, slow breath, and when he opened them, the decision was made. Vincent would pay. No matter who he was, no matter what blood bound them, some sins could not be forgiven. Blood was not a reason to excuse everything. There were crimes that could never be absolved. Vincent Russo was sitting in his penthouse in Manhattan when the phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw Tony's number, one of the bodyguards he had bought off long ago to serve as his eyes and ears inside the estate. He answered, and what Tony told him made the blood in his veins turn to ice. That little maid, Emma Sullivan, she just had a baby in the boss's clinic. The boss is digging. He wants the security footage from 7 months ago. Vincent lowered the phone, his hand beginning to shake. No, that was impossible. The little whore had kept the child. She had not gotten rid of it like he had assumed. And now Dominic was investigating, scraping at the past, searching for the truth Vincent had buried 7 months earlier. He stood up and began pacing the room like a caged animal. Panic quickly hardened into anger, a rage that burned like molten rock. Emma had ruined everything. He had warned her. He had threatened to kill her sister if she spoke, yet she had still betrayed him. She had carried the evidence, let Dominic find it, let his brother sniff his way toward the truth. And now what? What would Dominic do? Vincent knew his brother. Dominic could be cold and ruthless with enemies, but he had something Vincent had never possessed, and that was a code. Dominic never harmed women or children. That was a line he never crossed, and Vincent had trampled that line inside Dominic's own house. Vincent poured himself a glass of vodka and swallowed it in one motion, trying to steady his thoughts. He needed a plan. He needed to move first, before Dominic put all the pieces together. If his brother learned the full truth, if he had proof that could not be denied, Vincent would lose everything. Not just his place in the family, not just money and power. He could lose his life. Dominic had killed men for lesser offenses. He would not hesitate to punish his own brother if he believed it was the right thing to do. Vincent knew that better than anyone. He had to clean up this mess, and the only way to do that was to silence Emma forever. But the girl was inside the estate, under Dominic's protection. He could not touch her there. Not yet. Her sister, though, Lily, the college student living alone in that shabby Brooklyn apartment, she was different. Lily had no one to protect her. She was Emma's weakness, the person that little Maid loved most in the world. If Vincent could not shut Emma's mouth, he would send her a message instead, a message written in fire and blood. Vincent picked up his phone and dialed a number he had kept in his contacts for years. It belonged to Sal, a thug who specialized in the kind of dirty work no one wanted to get near. Sal did not ask why, did not care about right or wrong. All he needed was money, and he would do anything. Vincent gave his orders in a clear, icy voice. Apartment number 37. The old building on Maple Street in Brooklyn. There is a college girl living there. I want that apartment burned to the ground tonight. Make it look like an accident, faulty wiring or something. Sal asked what about the girl inside. Vincent was silent for a heartbeat, then answered, his voice flat. "I do not care if she lives or dies. Just make sure the place burns." He hung up and turned to the window, staring out at the glittering Manhattan skyline. A cold smile curled his lips. Emma Sullivan thought she could betray him and walk away. She thought Dominic would protect her. He would show her what happened when she chose the wrong side. He would burn down everything she loved, one piece at a time, until she had nothing left. And if Dominic wanted a war, he would get one. Vincent had nothing left to lose. He had gone too far to turn back. If he could not silence Emma, he would destroy everything she loved. That night, Emma had only just managed to snatch a few hours of sleep after a long, draining day when the shrill ring of her phone sliced through the quiet room. She jerked awake, her heart racing as she fumbled for the phone on the bedside table. Lily's name lit up the screen, and a nameless dread clamped around her chest. Lily never called in the middle of the night unless something was terribly wrong. Emma answered, and her sister's scream burst from the speaker like a knife plunging into her heart. "Emma, the apartment is on fire. I cannot get out." Lily's voice was ragged with smoke and tears, the sound of choking coughs and the roar of flames roaring in the background. "I am in the bedroom. The door is stuck. There is so much smoke. I cannot breathe." Emma lurched out of bed, the baby in the crib beside her startled awake and crying. She did not have time to think, did not have time to breathe. She bolted from the room and into the hallway, the phone pressed tight to her ear. "Lily, listen to me," she shouted, her own voice shaking with panic. "You have to find a way out. Climb out the window, do something, do you hear me?" But Lily's voice was growing weaker, her coughs harsher, her sobs more broken. "I am so scared, Emma. I do not want to die." "No," Emma screamed, tears spilling down her face. "You are not going to die. I will save you." Yet she was on Long Island, almost 2 hours from Brooklyn by car. She could not do anything. She was completely powerless. Emma ran down the corridor, not even sure where she was going, only knowing she needed help, needed someone who could save her sister. Then she saw Dominic stepping out of his office, his face drawn tight as if he too had not slept. He saw her, saw the tears streaking her cheeks, saw the despair in her eyes, and he came to her at once. What happened? His voice was sharp and fully awake. Emma could not form the words. She only thrust the phone toward him, and he heard Lily's screams, the crackle of flames, the choking smoke. He needed no further explanation. He pulled out his own phone and made a call at once, his tone icy and commanding. "The address," he said to Emma, and she stammered out the location of the Brooklyn apartment. Dominic repeated it into the phone, ordering his men to get there immediately, to call the fire department and the paramedics, to do whatever it took. Then he made another call, then another, summoning every resource he had to save Lily. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Emma's life. She sat on the hallway floor, the phone still at her ear, listening as Lily's voice grew weaker, as her coughing worsened. She prayed to any god who might be listening, begged that her sister would live, begged for a miracle. Dominic sat beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, a solid anchor in the center of the storm. And then, at last, she heard the sirens through the tiny speaker, the shouts of men, the crash of a door being forced open, and Lily's faint whisper just before the line went dead. "They are here." Emma bowed her head, sobbing with a wild mixture of relief and horror. An hour later, Dominic's men called back with their report. Lily had been saved. The girl had suffered only minor burns on her arm and smoke inhalation, and she was on her way to the hospital. She would live, and Emma wept all over again, this time with tears of gratitude. But that brief joy was quickly crushed by the next piece of news. The apartment had been completely destroyed, nothing left at all, every piece of furniture, every item of clothing, every book, every document, and worst of all, the keepsakes of her mother that Emma had guarded for 5 long years. The silver bracelet her mother had worn on her wedding day, the only remaining family photographs, the journal their mother had written for her 2 daughters. All of it had been turned to ash, and Emma felt as if a part of her own soul had burned up in that fire. Yet the worst was still to come. For the next morning, Marco Benedetti brought Dominic the preliminary findings from the police, and they said the fire was no accident. There were traces of an accelerant at several points in the apartment, and the building's security camera had caught a stranger slipping onto the 3rd floor only minutes before the flames erupted. This was deliberate arson. Someone had tried to kill Lily, and when Emma heard that, her whole body went cold, because she knew who was behind it. She knew exactly which snake's eyes had ordered her home burned. Vincent. He had carried out his threat. He had tried to kill her sister, and if he could do that, he could do anything. Emma collapsed then, her knees hitting the cold floor as tears poured down unchecked. The baby in her arms began to cry with her, as if it could feel its mother's grief. And Dominic stood there with his face carved from stone, his gray eyes blazing with fury. Then he bent down and laid a hand on Emma's shoulder, and she lifted her gaze to him, her eyes drowning in tears and despair. "He will kill us all," she whispered, her voice as shattered as the cinders of her burned apartment. "He will kill us all." The moment he learned of the arson, Dominic did not hesitate for even a heartbeat. He ordered his men to bring Lily straight from the hospital to the Long Island estate, and had a room prepared for her right beside Emma's in the East Wing, the safest part of the house, guarded by cameras 24 hours a day, with bulletproof steel doors and a secret escape route known only to Dominic and Marco. And he assigned 4 bodyguards to rotate their posts around the clock, 2 in the hallway and 2 in the garden below. No one was allowed near that wing without Dominic's direct permission. And now Emma and Lily were under the protection of Dominic Russo, which in the underworld of New York meant that no one dared to lay a hand on them. Lily arrived at the estate still dazed and terrified, a 20-year-old girl with brown hair like her sister and wide eyes that filled with tears the moment she saw Emma. The two of them clung to each other in the corridor, sobbing as Lily shook and stammered out the story of that terrible night, the choking black smoke, the flames closing in, the instant she was sure she was going to die. The burn on her arm was carefully bandaged, and Dominic's private doctor came every day to check the wound and make sure it did not become infected. While Emma told Lily nothing of the truth behind the fire, nothing about Vincent, nothing about whose child this baby was. She only said that someone wanted to hurt them, and that Mr. Dominic had kindly taken them in. And Lily did not press for more, perhaps because she was too exhausted to think, or perhaps because she sensed that there were things her sister was not yet ready to say. A week slipped by, and life in the Russo estate began to find a strange new balance. Lily recovered quickly with the resilience and bright spirit of 20. She asked to work in the kitchen so she would not feel like a burden, and Rosa gladly took her on as a helper, teaching her how to bake and how to cook the old Italian dishes, until Lily's laughter began to ring through the wide kitchen, and Emma watched her from a distance, her heart swelling with gratitude and relief, because at least Lily was safe, at least the girl could still laugh. Emma spent most of her time in the room with the baby, feeding him at her breast, changing his diapers, singing him to sleep. And for the first time in 9 months, she could look down at that tiny face without feeling fear or shame. The baby was innocent. He had not chosen his father or the circumstances of his birth. He was only a small, fragile life in need of love, and Emma would give him every ounce she had, though she still had not given him a name, as if she were waiting for something, for life to steady itself, for the storm to pass. Dominic came to see them every day, never for long, only a few minutes to ask if they needed anything, if they were comfortable, but Emma noticed the way he looked at the baby each time, how his cold gray eyes softened when they rested on the sleeping face, how once she saw him reach out a finger so the tiny hand could curl around it, and in that moment the face of Dominic Russo, the most feared mafia boss in New York, gentled in a way she had never imagined. He did not smile, but his gaze grew warmer than Emma had ever seen. One afternoon, Rosa brought a tray of food to Emma's room and found Dominic sitting beside the cradle, watching the baby sleep with a pensive expression. She paused in the doorway, her aging eyes brightening with something like hope. And when Dominic finally left, Rosa came to Emma's side and whispered, her voice warm and full of meaning, "I have worked for the Russo family for 30 years. This is the first time I have seen him look at anyone like that." And Emma could not find words. She only felt her cheeks grow hot and her heart beat a little faster. Another week of fragile peace drifted by in the Russo estate, and Emma began to let herself hope, to imagine that perhaps the nightmare was behind them, perhaps they might start over, perhaps life might turn towards something gentler. But she was wrong, because beyond the solid walls of the mansion the snake still watched and waited, and the greatest storm had yet to break. At the end of that week, Dominic summoned Vincent back to the estate, sending a brief message through Marco Benedetti, only a single line: "Come to my office at 8 in the evening. Do not be late." Vincent knew this was not an invitation but a command, and he had no choice but to obey. He arrived on time, walking into the house with a carefully composed mask of calm, while his insides shook. He had no idea how much Dominic had uncovered, no idea what evidence his brother might hold, but being called in like this was never a good sign. The office was dark and cold when Vincent walked in, lit only by a single desk lamp that cast a pale yellow circle over Dominic's face as he sat behind the desk, his gray eyes like 2 coals smoldering in the half-light. Marco stood in the corner, silent as a shadow, and the air in the room was so heavy it seemed to press against the lungs, tight as a string about to snap. While Vincent forced a smile and tried to sound casual, "What did you want to see me about, brother? You make it sound like I have done something wrong." But Dominic did not smile, did not speak. He only watched Vincent with that frozen stare, and the silence was more terrifying than any accusation. After a long, dragging minute, Dominic opened a drawer, took out a file, and laid it on the desk, turning the pages as he read in a low, steady voice like a judge pronouncing sentence. On the night of the 13th of March, 7 months ago, the security cameras covering the east hallway and the ground floor sitting room were shut off for 2 hours, from 11 at night until 1 in the morning. Only 4 people had access to the system: myself, Marco, and you. The 4th man died 5 years ago. Then he looked up, his gray gaze cutting straight through Vincent. "Do you want to explain why you turned off the cameras that night?" Vincent felt the blood rush the wrong way in his veins, but he forced himself to shrug and keep his tone light. "I do not remember. Maybe I accidentally hit something when I passed the security room." And Dominic nodded slowly as if weighing that lie, then turned to the next page. "Emma Sullivan, 27, employed here as a maid, gave birth 1 week ago. She states that you raped her on the 13th of March in the ground floor sitting room of this house. She states that you threatened to kill her sister if she spoke, and last week her sister's apartment in Brooklyn was deliberately set on fire." He set the file down and looked Vincent full in the face. "Do you want to explain any of that?" Vincent felt the world tilt beneath his feet. He knew he could not deny everything, but he still tried, clinging to the desperate hope that his brother would believe him over a servant. "She is lying," he shouted, his voice rising. "She seduced me. She wanted money. She wanted to crawl into a Russo's bed and change her life. Can you not see that? She is a whore. She came after me, and now she is accusing me to extort us." And Dominic sat still, listening to Vincent's rant and accusations with an unreadable face. And only when Vincent paused for breath did he finally speak, his voice as cold as ice. "How stupid do you think I am?" Vincent froze. "What?" he managed, and Dominic stepped out from behind the desk and came toward him. "You think I do not know what kind of man you are. I have been covering for you your whole life. I have cleaned up every mess you made. I paid off the people you beat, robbed, and hurt. I sent you to Europe to hide from the consequences of that deadly crash you caused while drunk. I know exactly who you are, Vincent. I know exactly what you are capable of." He stopped right in front of him, taller by half a head, his presence and contained fury pressing down like a weight. "And I know Emma is not lying. She has no reason to lie. She was so terrified of you that she hid a pregnancy for 9 months and gave birth alone in a dark clinic because you threatened to kill her sister." "What kind of woman does that for money?" Vincent stumbled back a step, his face gone pale, the confident mask stripped away to reveal what lay beneath. Cowardice, weakness, fear. "You cannot do this to me," he stammered, his voice shaking. "I am your brother. We are blood. Our parents would never want you to treat me this way." Dominic looked at him, and in those gray eyes there was something like grief, the deep sorrow of a man who has just lost a member of his family. "You died to me the moment you touched her," he said, his voice low and heavy with pain. "You have 24 hours to get out of New York. If I see your face in this city after that, I will not consider you my brother anymore. And you know what that means." Vincent stared at Dominic, stared into his brother's ice-cold gaze, and he knew this was no idle threat. Dominic Russo did not speak empty words. He opened his mouth to beg one more time, but Dominic had already turned his back, ordering Marco to take him out. 2 guards appeared in the doorway, seized Vincent by the arms, and dragged him away. He did not fight, did not shout, only walked in silence with his eyes lowered. But just before he crossed the threshold he turned and looked at Dominic one last time, and in those green eyes Dominic saw no remorse, no shame, only hatred, a dark flame smoldering, waiting for its chance to rise up and burn everything to the ground. Vincent Russo did not leave New York as ordered. Instead he hid in a secret apartment in Queens, a place no one in the family knew about, and began to plot his revenge. He had lost everything because of that little maid and her bastard child, his place in the family, his money, his power, and most of all, the respect of the older brother he had both resented and longed to please all his life. Dominic had chosen a servant over his own flesh and blood, and that betrayal burned in Vincent's chest like acid, eating away his reason and turning him into a cornered animal, vicious and desperate. If he could not have what he wanted, he would make sure no one else did either. He reached out to Tony, the bodyguard he had bought long ago to act as his mole inside the estate. And Tony was now one of the 4 men assigned to guard Emma and the baby, the perfect position for Vincent's plan. Vincent promised him a great deal of money, enough for him to vanish from the country and live comfortably for the rest of his life, in exchange for one simple task: create an opportunity for Vincent to get to Emma when Dominic was not there. Tony agreed without hesitation. His loyalty measured in cash, and Vincent was paying more than Dominic. The chance came the following afternoon when Dominic had to leave the estate for an important business meeting in Manhattan, one that could not be postponed, and before he left, he carefully arranged security, making sure 4 guards would watch over Emma and the baby the entire time he was gone. He did not know that one of them had already betrayed him, did not know that the snake was coiled just outside the mansion walls, waiting for the moment he turned his back. Emma spent the afternoon in her room with the baby, nursing him and humming lullabies, and when he woke around 4 in the afternoon, she decided to take him out into the rose garden for a little while. The doctor had said the gentle afternoon sun was good for newborns, and Emma herself needed fresh air after so many days indoors. She told Tony, who was on duty in the hallway, that she would be in the garden for about half an hour, and he nodded, his expression as ordinary as ever, offering no sign that he was silently counting down the seconds until the plan moved forward. The Russo rose garden was like a painting in the golden light of an autumn afternoon, deep red and pale pink blossoms opening under the soft sun, their sweet scent drifting through the air. Emma walked along the stone path with the baby in her arms, feeling, for the first time in many months, something like real peace, unaware that Tony had slipped away the moment she left his line of sight to alert Vincent that the target was alone in the garden, unaware that the 2 other guards had already been drugged in the break room, unaware that the back gate had been quietly unlocked and left waiting for predators. She was sitting on a stone bench beside a bed of white roses, gazing down at the baby with tender eyes. When she heard footsteps, she looked up, expecting to see Rosa or another servant, and instead her heart seemed to stop when she saw Vincent Russo stepping out from behind the hedge, 2 large, hard-faced men at his back. Vincent's green eyes gleamed with a mad light when he saw her, and that familiar half-smile curved his lips like the sweep of a scythe. Emma lurched to her feet, a mother's instincts making her clutch the baby tight to her chest and back away. She opened her mouth to scream for help, but Vincent had already signaled his men. They moved faster than thought, one clamping a rough hand over her mouth, the other pinning her arms from behind. Emma fought wildly, struggling to shield the wailing baby in her arms, but she was far too weak for them. Vincent walked up to her, bent close, and stared into her tear-filled eyes, his whisper dripping with poison. "Do you remember what I told you?" he murmured. "I told you if you opened your mouth you would lose everything. You did not listen. Now you are going to pay." From the kitchen window, Rosa had been drying dishes when she caught sight of the scene in the rose garden. The plate in her hand slipped and shattered on the floor, but she did not even notice. Her aging eyes flew wide in horror as she saw Emma being dragged away by 2 men, her mouth covered, the baby screaming, and she recognized the man directing the abduction, Vincent. She turned and ran out of the kitchen as fast as her old legs would carry her, shouting for help while her fingers fumbled for her phone to call Dominic. Emma was hustled through the back gate, the baby's cries ripping through the quiet afternoon like a desperate alarm. The trap had sprung perfectly. Before she could scream, darkness consumed her. Vincent didn't risk dragging her across the open lawn where cameras might spot them. Instead, he forced her toward the old garden maintenance shed, which concealed the entrance to the service tunnels running beneath the estate. He dragged her through the damp, narrow passages straight to the wine cellar in the west wing. He chose this place for a reason. Thick concrete walls, a heavy iron door, and absolute silence. It was the perfect slaughterhouse right under his brother's nose. Once, this had been where his father kept the most precious bottles, old Bordeaux and Burgundy that had aged for decades. But now it became a prison for Emma and her newborn. The 2 henchmen threw her onto the cold stone floor and left, slamming the heavy iron door behind them, the echoing crash like a death knell. Emma cradled the baby against her chest, trying to soothe his terrified cries, and looked around the dim cellar, lit by a single small bulb hanging from the ceiling, its weak yellow light barely pushing back the dark. Racks of wine towered to the ceiling like silent walls, the air thick with damp and old oak, and there were no windows, no exit. In no way she could scream loud enough for anyone to hear. She was utterly alone, utterly helpless, in the hands of the most dangerous man she had ever known. The iron door swung open again and Vincent stepped inside, his eyes blazing with madness. He had changed since the last time she had seen him in the sitting room that night. His face was thinner, his beard unshaven, and the green eyes that had once been sharp as a snake's now burned with the fire of insanity. He looked like a cornered beast, unpredictable and deadly, each step he took toward her thudding through the cellar like a war drum. "Do you know?" he said, his voice shaking with rage, and something that sounded almost like hurt. "I had everything, money, power, a place in the family, and you took it all away because you would not keep your mouth shut." He stopped right in front of her, looking down at her huddled on the floor with the baby in her arms. "You destroyed my life. You turned my own brother against me." He leaned down, grabbed her chin, and forced her to meet his stare. "Now I'm going to take what you love most, and you are going to watch. You do not get to close your eyes." Emma understood at once what he meant. The baby. He would kill her child. Terror flared inside her like a flash fire, and she did the only thing a mother's instinct told her to do. She dropped to her knees in front of Vincent, still clutching the baby to her chest, and began to beg. "Please," she sobbed, her voice splintering. "The baby is innocent. He has done nothing wrong. Please kill me. Do whatever you want to me, but do not touch my child, please." She bowed her head to the stone floor, tears dripping onto the cold rock. Her body curved over the tiny bundle beneath her like a living shield. Vincent looked down at her, and for a brief heartbeat something flickered in his eyes. Perhaps hesitation, perhaps the faint remnant of a conscience he had buried long ago. But it vanished almost instantly, swallowed by rage and hate. He kicked her hard, knocking her to the side, and screamed like a wounded animal. "You think tears will save you. You think I am going to feel sorry for you. You destroyed everything I had. You made my brother choose you over me." He kicked her again and again, shouting curses and blame with each blow. Miles away in Manhattan, Dominic Russo was sitting in a conference room with business partners when his phone buzzed. He was about to ignore it, but when he saw Rosa's name on the screen, he knew something was wrong. Rosa never called unless it was urgent. He excused himself and stepped outside to answer. Her voice poured out in a rush of panic and tears. "Boss, Emma has been taken, Vincent. He took Emma and the baby, in the rose garden. It just happened." Dominic froze for a single second, the blood in his veins turning to ice, and then rage erupted inside him like an exploding volcano. He shot to his feet, eyes blazing with a hellish fire. Over the phone, he barked orders to Marco, his voice sharp as steel. "Lock down the estate, check every exit, find Vincent. He cannot have gone far." Then he hung up and stormed out of the building without a word of farewell to anyone, with only one thought left in his mind: find Emma, save her and the child, and make Vincent pay. In the dark cellar, Emma lay curled on the cold stone, wrapping her bruised body around the baby who wailed in her arms. Pain throbbed everywhere from Vincent's kicks, but she did not care. As long as her child was breathing, as long as the baby was safe against her, she would endure anything. Vincent had gone out to prepare whatever final act he had in mind, leaving her alone with her fear and despair. Emma closed her eyes, tears sliding down her face, and began to sing to the baby in a trembling voice. The same lullaby her mother used to sing to her, a song about stars and gentle dreams. She sang through her tears, sang for her son, sang for herself, and waited for whatever fate would bring. Dominic drove like a madman from Manhattan to Long Island, tearing past speed limits and running red lights without a second thought, his mind filled with a single image, Emma and the baby in Vincent's hands. When he reached the estate, Marco was waiting at the door with the latest information. They had searched the entire house. Vincent had not left the grounds. He was in the West Wing wine cellar. 2 of his men had been captured at the back gate. Dominic said nothing. He plunged into the mansion, leaving Marco and the guards hurrying behind. He did not need them. This was between him and his brother. This was family. The staircase to the cellar was dark and damp, each of Dominic's footsteps echoing like the drumbeat of war. He could hear the baby crying on the other side of the iron door, and his heart clenched. Alive. The baby was alive. Emma was alive. He smashed the door open with a brutal kick, the hinges shrieking as it slammed into the wall. Light from the hallway spilled into the gloom, and the sight that met him made his blood boil like molten rock. Vincent stood in the center of the cellar, one hand yanking Emma upright, the other pressing a dagger to her throat. Emma clutched the screaming baby to her chest, her face pale and wet with tears, but her amber-brown eyes still burned with the desperate resolve of a mother who would protect her child to her last breath. Purple bruises on her face and arms showed clearly that Vincent had not been gentle. When he saw Dominic, Vincent smiled a wild, jagged smile, and the blade bit closer into Emma's neck. a thin bead of bright red welling on her white skin. "Stay right there, brother," Vincent said, his voice high and shaking. "One more step and this girl dies." Dominic halted in the doorway, his gray eyes locking on Vincent's, cold as ice yet blazing underneath with an inferno waiting to be unleashed. He lifted both hands to show he was unarmed, but when he spoke, his voice still carried weight and danger. "Let her go, Vincent. This is between you and me. She and the child have nothing to do with it." Vincent laughed, a jagged, hysterical sound that bounced off the stone walls. "Nothing to do with it?" he shouted. "She is the cause of everything. She ruined my life. She made you turn your back on your own blood." Dominic took one slow step into the cellar, never taking his eyes off Vincent. "I did not turn my back on you," he said quietly. "I turned my back on what you did. You raped an innocent woman in our home. You threatened to kill her sister. You burned her apartment. And now you have kidnapped her and her baby." His voice dropped, heavy with sorrow and fury. "You have become something our parents would be ashamed to look at." Vincent flinched as if struck, his eyes blazing with lunatic rage. "Do not talk to me about our parents," he screamed. "You were always the perfect son, the golden boy, the heir. What was I? Your shadow, the failure, the one who was never enough." He jerked Emma closer, pressing the knife harder against her skin. "And now you choose a maid over your own blood, your own family." Dominic held his gaze, and in his gray eyes there was once more that flicker of grief, the sorrow of an older brother looking at his younger one for the last time. "You stopped being my brother when you became a monster," he said. The words cut into Vincent like a blade. He roared in wounded fury, and in that moment of lost control, he swung the knife toward Dominic. Emma screamed and dropped to the floor, curling herself around the baby to pull him out of harm's way. Dominic did not dodge. He lifted his left arm to block, the blade slicing deep into flesh, blood spilling bright and hot, but he did not so much as flinch. With his right hand he drove a punch straight into Vincent's face, putting all his strength behind it. There was a crack of breaking bone and Vincent's howl of pain as he crashed backward, the knife flying from his hand. Before he could scramble up, Dominic was on him, one forearm crushing against his throat. The guards burst into the cellar at that moment, weapons drawn, but Dominic motioned them back. He looked down at Vincent, who wheezed for breath beneath him, and his gray eyes were merciless. "You are lucky you are my brother," he said. "If you were anyone else, you would die here." Then he rose and ordered the guards to restrain Vincent. "Take him out of here. Put him on a plane and throw him out of this country. If he sets foot in America again, he is no longer part of the Russo family." He glanced back at Vincent, who was being hauled to his feet, blood streaming from his broken nose, his eyes still burning with hatred. "If you come back," Dominic said, his tone like a death sentence, "I will not hold back." They dragged Vincent from the cellar, his voice echoing down the corridor in hoarse screams of threat and curses. "You will regret this. I will come back. I will take everything you love." His words faded as they carried him away. Dominic watched his brother's back vanish for the last time, then turned back to Emma. She sat huddled on the floor, clutching the crying baby, her whole body shaking. Dominic dropped to one knee beside her, his arm still bleeding freely, but he did not spare it a thought. He simply wrapped his uninjured arm around her and the child, drawing them into the solid shelter of his chest. "It is over," he whispered in her ear, his voice so gentle Emma almost did not recognize it. "You are safe now. Both of you are safe." 2 weeks passed after that terrible night in the wine cellar, and life inside the Russo estate changed completely. Emma and her son lived now in a spacious suite right beside Dominic's room, and she had given the baby a name, Lucas, meaning light, because he was the small bright flame in the darkness of her life. The room was stocked with everything a child could need, from a carved oak cradle to tiny clothes sewn from the softest cotton. Emma was no longer a maid. She was a guest of the house, protected and cared for as if she were truly part of the family. Lily stayed on as well, fully recovered and happily working in the kitchen with Rosa, learning to cook traditional Italian dishes and, for the first time in her life, feeling genuinely safe. Dominic came to see Emma and Lucas every day now, not just for a few minutes as before, but for hours at a time. He sat beside the cradle and watched Lucas sleep with a tenderness no one would ever have imagined from a man known as a cold-blooded mafia boss. He learned how to mix formula and change diapers, even how to lull the baby to sleep with old Italian songs his mother had once sung to him when he was a child. The wound on his arm had healed, leaving a long scar as a quiet reminder of that night, but he had no regrets. He would have done the same thing 1,000 times over if it meant keeping Emma and Lucas safe. Emma saw the change in Dominic, saw the man hidden beneath the icy shell, and her heart began to stir in ways she had never expected. One afternoon, as the sunset poured gold over the rose garden and Lucas slept peacefully in his cradle, Dominic and Emma sat together on the stone bench where she had once been taken. The garden had returned to its calm beauty. The roses still bloomed as if they had never witnessed anything terrible. Dominic turned to look at Emma, his gray eyes warmer than she had ever seen them. "You can stay here," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Not as a servant. I mean really stay. With me." Emma looked into his eyes and saw honesty there, and something that looked very much like hope. She did not answer in words. She simply reached out and took his hand, sliding her slender fingers into his strong ones. It was an answer that needed no speech. Rosa arrived at that exact moment, her face tight with worry. She was holding a large white envelope with no return address. "Boss," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "This just came in the mail. No sender's name." Dominic frowned, took the envelope, and opened it. Inside was a photograph. Emma leaned closer, and her heart seemed to stop. It was a picture of Dominic, herself, and Lucas in this very rose garden, taken just the day before. Someone had photographed them from a distance, from an angle where no one would have noticed. At the bottom corner of the picture, a line of messy black ink had been scrawled. 2 chilling words. "See you soon." Emma began to shake, the old familiar fear crawling up her spine. Vincent. He was still watching them, still waiting. Dominic studied the photograph for a long moment, his jaw clenched hard, but when he turned to Emma, there was no fear in his eyes, only iron determination. He pulled her into his arms and held her close as if he could shield her from the entire world. "He will never touch our family again," he whispered against her ear, his voice both a promise and an oath. "I will protect you and Lucas with my life." Emma rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady strength of his heartbeat. She knew that even though the storm was not over and the darkness still lurked, she was no longer alone. This time, they would be ready. The story of Emma and Dominic closes here, but their journey is far from finished. This is the story of a woman's resilience, as she walks through her own private hell to protect her child, of love taking root in the most unexpected places, and of how sometimes the people we think are monsters carry the warmest hearts. The lesson we can carry from their story is that no matter how dark the circumstances life throws us into, we must never surrender hope. We must believe that after the storm the sky will clear, and that the people who truly deserve us will appear to lift us up when we need it most. Love, sacrifice, and courage can conquer any darkness. Thank you for staying with this story to the very end. If you feel that Emma and Dominic's journey has touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel, pressing the like button, and sharing this video with the people you love, so they too can hear meaningful stories like this one. We would truly love to know how you feel about Emma and Dominic's story. Have you ever gone through difficult times in your life and found someone who lifted you up? What do you think about the strength of a mother's love and the human capacity to change? Please leave a comment below and share what you feel from deep inside your heart. We will read every single one, and we are very much looking forward to hearing your stories. We wish each of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in your days. May you always keep your faith in life and hold close the people around you. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.